The Baltimore Ravens declined Patrick Queen's fifth-year option, and that raises the big question of if he should be traded by Baltimore or if he should stay with the Ravens for the 2023 season. We talk about that, get into more analysis of Baltimore's full 2023 draft class, their undrafted free agent class as well, Lamar Jackson's big contract, and also dive into the question of the cornerback position and whether Rocky Ya-Sin, Marcus Peters, or both could become members of the Ravens very soon. All that and more coming up next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire. We're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, thank you so much for being here with us, tuning in and making us your first listen every day. We're free and available all podcasting platforms, including over on YouTube in video form. You can subscribe for free, both in audio and video form. And today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Don't miss your chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/locked on. It is Taco Tuesday here, the second day of May, and here to break down everything Ravens, Patrick Queen, draft, Lamar, corner. It's Spencer Schultz of Exit 52 in Baltimore Beatdown. And Spencer, it's what a week, what a draft weekend it was for the Ravens. We get the big Lamar news on draft night, and then everyone's like, all right, cool. Now let's get to the draft. They take Zay Flowers. Obviously, we have Patrick Queen news. How was your draft weekend? It was pretty hectic, I know, for a lot of people.
Yeah, it was very fun. It was not quite, the draft of years past with the Ravens making a bunch of trades and moving around and things of that nature. They do trade in towards the end of the draft there, almost at the end of the draft. So that was a little bit more of a happenstance, but it was super exciting. Lamar Jackson ends up getting extended on the day of the draft, which of course led to further speculation. Why really finalize that? If you're Eric DeCosta and the Ravens, why get it done on the day of the draft? Is it for DeAndre Hopkins to open up some cap space to make a big move? But it was a joy. It was a joy to see Lamar Jackson extended. Momentous occasion in the city of Baltimore and for the Ravens fan base and franchise and everything in between, with the biggest contract, really in NFL history, in terms of total value there. And Lamar Jackson getting the second most guaranteed money at signing, second guaranteed amount for injury, and just a resolution to a 2-year-long saga of contract negotiations and trade requests and rumors and speculation and everything in between. So that was a really nice, awesome way to get the draft started. And it feels like it went a little bit under the radar because it did happen on draft day. And if it was, a month ago, it would have been the talk of NFL Network and ESPN and everyone around for quite some time, but kind of get swept up into the draft. And to see Lamar Jackson happy, the Ravens happy, and then able to go execute and add yet another offensive weapon was super exciting. And of course, you can get into the nitty gritty of their 3rd, 4th, 5th round picks and those guys, but ultimately, Zay Flowers is the headliner. The success of their draft class will be based on that first-round pick, and it was a really fun draft. So it was an interesting time, a huge day a little bit out of left field. It felt like the narrative had shifted. There was a more positive air going on in the weeks leading up to the draft, especially once the Ravens signed Odell Beckham, and apparently that was a paramount in part with Jalen Hurts' contract, and ends up getting Lamar Jackson done, getting through the draft, and looking forward to what finishing touches the Ravens can put on this roster and move forward.
Yeah, I think it was a weight off of everybody's shoulders. Even if I do agree, I think it did go under the radar because of the draft, but we kind of saw it all unfold in real time almost with, Jameson tweeting out the good news for the Ravens. And then obviously a lot of people jumped on it then, and just watching it all unfold was a pretty out of body experience for a lot of people. I know I saw that a lot, but that was one big question answered. We got another big question answered on Monday, Spencer, with Patrick Queen and his 5th-year option, the Ravens declining it, which I don't think was a surprise to anybody, especially after Roquan got his 5-year, $100 million contract. The Ravens obviously take Trenton Simpson in the 3rd round. And for Queen, it's kind of like, where does he fit into the long-term future? It just doesn't really seem like the Ravens are going to have the ability to pay two linebackers big money there. I think Queen's a really good player. I think he fits really well next to Roquan Smith and in this defense. I think he's improved a lot, but I just sometimes you can't keep everybody. And we've seen that with the Ravens. They draft good players and sometimes they have to walk. So the question now, Spencer, is should they trade him, maybe get, I don't know, a mid-round pick, package him for a player? I know Jair Alexander's name has been thrown out there. It's kind of like the big fish piece, Queen and a pick for Jair Alexander. Or do you keep him on the roster for 2023? He plays well and maybe get a comp pick back for him in free agency. Which route would you take?
Yeah, I think I would let Patrick Queen play through this season and see where that takes you. What I had kind of heard through the grapevine is that, he was asking for somewhere in the average annual value of $15 million a year on a new contract. So that would be a gigantic amount of money to dedicate to him and Roquan Smith. The Ravens obviously traded for and traded significant capital for. So the fifth year, I believe, would have been around $12 million. The franchise tag is about $17 million. But I think at this point, you draft Trenton Simpson, someone who's was a true junior, 21-year-old, played in a little bit of an overhang role. And linebacker, there's a pretty big jump in a lot of systems. I don't know about Mike McDonald's, especially in contrast to Wink Martindale's, but going from the college level to the NFL level, it's a pretty big jump, I would say, technically, fundamentally, and a lot of quick diagnosis is required on complex schemes and ideas. And if you can get picked on, you'll get picked on. We saw Patrick Queen get picked on when he was a young linebacker. Same deal. True, I believe he was a true junior coming out, was drafted at 20 years old. So throwing him into the fire, throwing Trenton Simpson into the fire from day one when you have a guy like Patrick Queen, I don't think is a great idea. Somewhat reminiscent of the Chuck Clark situation that transpired last year, the different magnitude, but the Ravens go ahead and draft Kyle Hamilton. Obviously, a super high pick, one of the higher picks the Ravens have ever had. And Chuck Clark, clearly gruntled there with that situation and feels like, might have been the beginning of the end. Feels that way a little bit with Patrick Queen. But what Queen was able to do last year, even before Roquan Smith came along, then once Roquan Smith did come along as well, within Mike McDonald's system, being able to be an explosive blitzer, being able to diagnose in coverage and get quick depth and cut passes off over the middle and get him to his hooks and his curls and really vision to the ball a lot more with a little less responsibility and a little bit more run fit responsibility passed on to the defensive line was a blessing. Able to see him play an aggressive style when fitting, shooting the gap right at the snap, making sure that there was some sort of penetration and allowing Smith to go clean up. It was a really nice yin and yang in many ways. I think that it would be a little bit negligent to get rid of a player like Queen who's under control for this season when you would immediately be, in the event of a Roquan Smith injury or even another player, down pretty bad if you were to see one of those guys go down. At this point, you're considering Malik Harrison and Trenton Simpson to be depth. And, perhaps the Ravens could ask a little more of Malik Harrison, but just doesn't feel like he really fits the explosive sideline speed, blitzing mold of what they want in McDonald's defense. They do have Josh Ross, who's a forgotten man that had a really nice preseason last year, made the 53, and I think can be a contributor on a football team. But I think the best move for them right now is sit tight, hold on to Patrick Queen, see if something can get worked out, see if you can get some competition going with him and Trenton Simpson. Clearly, he was a little aware of the beginning of the end. He tweets out sheesh, and I think he retweeted that the Ravens declined his fifth-year option. There's been rumors and a lot of connections to the Texans for whatever reason. But ultimately, I think the move is to sit tight, keep your linebacker, keep an impact player in your defense, and let Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen be a force to be reckoned with, and guys that can shut down backs and make explosive plays and really just end a lot of plays overall within that system.
Yeah, and I think that's a way to make this whole Simpson thing, at least early on, I think work really well, where it's not, as you talked about, maybe throwing him into the fire here. You have Queen, and we kind of saw the trajectory, the arc that Patrick Queen had over the first couple of years there. And I know the question now, Spencer, is, how do you make those three guys work? Even if it would be just for one season, how do you think they could make those guys work playing time-wise, where you put them all over the field? How do you see those three playing with each other, whether it's just two of them, three of them, where you're rotating guys in and out? How do you see it working?
I think that Simpson, again, 21 years old, coming from not really playing a true inside backer role, I think it's a little too rich to assume that he's going to come in and play an overhang type role, play in the slot, or go play a ton of, weak side, outside linebacker 5 tech. I think that, you don't want to, we've seen situations like what the Cardinals have done with guys like Reddick and Simmons and Collins, and what the Ravens did with Kamalei Correa a while ago. You don't really want to, just because Micah Parsons exists, the outlier is not the norm. Parsons, someone that had really advanced block deconstruction and the ability to engage with offensive linemen at Penn State. Wouldn't say that's the strong part of Trenton Simpson's game at this point. So I think letting him sit, learn, play special teams, integrating him a snap or two on third down perhaps could be interesting. Having him mug over the A gap and go blitz, go be fast, go be aggressive, get a couple miles under his feet. Sure, but ultimately I'm looking at Smith and Queen. If the Ravens are able to hold on to Queen to take the majority of the snaps there, I don't think that changes really at all. So I would expect it to be Smith and Queen rocking and rolling unless they trade Queen, in which case, Simpson has every possibility to become a day one starter. I think Zach Orr said he had him as the number 1 linebacker on his board, but I think it would be a little bit quick to jump the gun to make that move when you haven't seen Simpson in your system through minicamp, through training camp, everything like that. And again, I think it's just creating the potential for a hole and an absence of a playmaker in Patrick Queen that was an impact player at times for your defense last year when you don't have to. So I think, hey, if there's an offer you can't refuse, you find that that's value way above what you want, sure. But feels like the Ravens are trying to push the chips towards the middle of this season a little bit. So if Patrick Queen's cool to play, then have as much talent as you can, have as much depth as you can, and move forward with Smith and Queen. Don't put a bunch of pressure on Simpson as a rookie. Let him marinate a little bit, work on his technique, work on his fundamentals, be with 2 professional first-round pick guys, one of which the highest paid inside linebacker in football, and go from there.
Yeah, and I agree with everything you said. I think the Ravens, it is kind of, I don't want to call it all in because, it's not like what the Rams did where we now see what they're doing with their roster. They won the Super Bowl. They got what they wanted, but obviously that roster is it's being reconstructed now. I think the Ravens, though, do have kind of hey, you put it really well, pushing the chips in the middle while still having a future. You still have the future regardless there, where I don't think it's a necessity. You don't have to trade Queen. He's a really good player. He's under team control for 1 more season here on a really cheap price. You can utilize that. He can play really well. I think he's going to be motivated. He can play well, help the Ravens out, help himself out. And then, if you're getting offered a 4th rounder for him or a 3rd rounder for him, the Ravens are probably going to get either a 3rd or a 4th back for him, regardless, with a comp pick. So to me, I just think that it's worth it to have him on the roster, play next to Roquan. We saw that duo play well together. You can kind of put Simpson in a role where he can be successful, but it's not necessarily you're relying on him for everything at the start, in the middle of that defense, or wherever you're going to put him there. So coming up in the second segment, we'll be diving a little bit more into Trenton Simpson, also the Ravens draft class as a whole, their undrafted free agent class as well. So be sure to stay tuned. A lot to get to still on Locked On Ravens. But first, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs, because right now new customers can get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. I'm a big Denver Nuggets guy. They obviously have a huge series going on with the Phoenix Suns right now. And so if you want to get a Nikola Jokic prop in there, you can parlay that with Jamal Murray. He's on fire. I think that'd be a really good move to make. And they have great promotions every day. It's super safe and secure app as well. And you get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet all the playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on to get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's FanDuel.com/locked on. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. We're back. Our second segment, Locked On Ravens, here with Spencer Schultz still. I am Kevin Ostreicher. And Spencer, I know the draft was big. 6 picks for the Ravens. The big headliner, as you called him, was Zay Flowers, the pick at 22. We now have more information that the Giants were actually trying to trade up to get him. Did not work out. The Ravens snagged him there at 22. The board kind of fell. I think it was really interesting how it fell. The run on receivers, the Ravens are right in the middle of it. Jackson Smith and Jigba goes to Seattle at 20. Quentin Johnston to the Chargers at 21. Obviously, Flowers to Baltimore at 22. And then Jordan Addison at 23. Other players are on the board, though. Joey Porter Jr. was still there. A couple other solid cornerbacks. Do you think Zay Flowers was the right pick for them at 22? And what's your overall scouting report on him and how he can fit in with the Ravens?
Yeah, I think that, we talked about this last week. I had Jackson Smith and Jigba as the clear-cut top guy. I know the Ravens kind of said publicly Flowers was their number 1 guy, but I struggle to think that he was above JSN. There were some funny things that were leaked, like the little Excel sheet of the Ravens draft board, and it kind of did match with the rest of the Ravens picks there. But I believe JSN was probably their top guy, and I think Zay Flowers was what they expected their top guy to be available at 22. JSN went later than I expected, and of course, it was a run consecutively. I think that the connection to the Shrine Bowl and the reports the Ravens were quote-unquote attached at the hip to Flowers makes a ton of sense. When we talked last week, I said, I think I would give maybe the nod to Addison because of his ability to maybe fill in and do some of the things similarly that a Bateman or Beckham can do at the stem, run maybe a little bit more complete boundary route tree in some ways. But Flowers, according to Matt Harmon of Reception Perception, had a 70% or better against zone, against man, and against press. And Addison, nowhere near in terms of success rate in what he did against press. Saw him get bullied a little bit at times. Flowers is always going to bring that dynamic after the catch or with the football in his hand ability, something he was doing when he was a freshman. And that's the thing. One of the things I think goes under the radar with Flowers. People look back at his 2022 tape, maybe a little bit of 2021, but 2019 and 2020, he was a major contributor as well. I believe he had something like 35 carries as a true freshman at 165 pounds. At Boston College and averaged like over 6 yards a carry. They just had to get the football in his hand. He had 27 carries for 195 yards, averaged 7.2 per carry, and scored a touchdown. Ended up with 49 touches as a true freshman. And at his size, super impressive. They ended up getting him 57 total carries throughout his career. So someone that does possess otherworldly ability after the catch with the football in his hands. I think it was and again, between him and Addison, those are the two that I would have preferred over Johnston in that situation. But they ended up going with Flowers there, and no qualm adding the offensive playmaker. I think that's what I spoke about last week too. Is that it felt like no matter what, they were going to take someone that makes plays with the football in their hands, as opposed to a cornerback or as opposed to a defensive player or a defensive BPA. They wanted to put the finishing bow, hopefully, on this offense. It felt like if Flowers maybe had gone from the way they're talking about him, that maybe they would have ended up trading 22 back to 34 for Hopkins, but instead they hopefully get a little bit more of a long-term solution. Flowers should be able to play inside and outside a good bit. I think that he is a little limited in some of the, asking him to go run comebacks and things like that on the perimeter might not play to his strengths as he is a little bit smaller in stature, but seen some pretty crazy comps on him. Steve Smith Sr. and Chris Sims, I think, compare him to Jalen Waddle, Antonio Brown, Percy Harvin, a bunch of really electric players. Steve Smith says he reminds him of himself a little bit. So if he can be in that world, I was trying to find maybe a non all-pro crazy player, and was looking at Eddie Royal, a former Bronco who had a really nice season as a rookie, had some injury problems, never really turned into like a 1,500-yard guy or anything, but had, a 90-catch season as a rookie, was an impact returner and electric with the football in his hands, longtime pro. I think you can get at least at a minimum that level of contribution early. And then again, having Dobbins and Andrews and Flowers and Bateman hopefully healthy on the football field, you're going to be a lot more explosive in playmaking with the football in their hands. Flowers is so balanced in the way that he approaches defenders after the catch, being able to square them up, make them miss, run through contact. His contact balance is awesome. His body control is awesome. His vision, superb, super explosive, twitched up dude, and excited to see what he can do after the catch. Will he maybe be a 80 reception guy, 90 reception guy? Maybe, but I think having him in a role where you can just get the football into his hands and let him make plays a la maybe a Kadarius Toney or a Mecole Hardman in some ways too, maybe a little bit more like a Toney, is something that at least gives you immediate impact this year, no matter what, no matter if you feel like he's developed well enough or can, do everything you want him to possibly do as a pro. In year one, he's going to make an impact with the football in his hands and can take the top off a little bit too. So I think it was a wise call to just add more playmaking ability to the receiver room, to the pass game, and overall, it's a pick that the Ravens were really happy with, so they have to have a clear-cut plan for him and get ready to go.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it was a solid pick. I know there were people wanted some corners still, but I think Flowers is electric. You slot him in next to Odell Beckham, Rashad Bateman. You have a very solid wide receiver trio there. But I know we talked about Trenton Simpson a little bit, Spencer. I will ask you one more. Were you surprised that they went linebacker that early, or did it make sense to you?
No, I mean, it seems like the plan was to add Zay Flowers, add the offensive player they were looking for, and then from there go stock the shelves defensively, knowing that you just paid your quarterback. So they go get an edge defender, they go get a cornerback, they go get a linebacker. So they added 3 levels of defensive depth. And with Simpson, I mean, they said Zach Orr was had him as the number 1 linebacker on their board ahead of Jack Campbell. They kind of maybe say that a little bit to feel super good, but the fact that they shouted out Zach Orr did make it seem like it was possible for sure. So, and in Mike Macdonald's system, similar to how we talk about Patrick Queen, being able to use him as a space apex force defender in ways, keep him clean, ask him to blitz, play line games, his ability in coverage to be a little bit longer, a little bit taller, and occupy space, carry some tight ends, match some running backs out of the backfield makes sense. They love their BPA. They wanted to stock the shelves. So cornerback, I mean, a guy like Kyu Blue Kelly that, so many people thought it would be a corner, and including myself in round 3 or round 4, but they end up getting the trope of the physical, big, athletic press man corner that they love typically, and that was so strong in this class. So I'm sure they feel like he has a chance to get on the field as a rookie, and that kind of offsets anyone feeling, oh, they didn't get a corner. Well, hey, there's a little bit of a difference between round 3 and round 5, but it's not crazy, especially in the back end of round 3 there. So Simpson, a player that was highly regarded as a prospect, made some impact at Clemson, was asked to do some unique things, and hopefully he's able to make plays. I don't think it was shocking, especially when you see Jeff Zrebiec continuously hinting, oh, I would also add Trenton Simpson into the mix when you're considering who they're going to draft. And then around later saying that, they were going to consider the gentleman out of they're going to consider Tavius Robinson as well. Oh, I would also throw Tavius Robinson. It might be because somebody's telling Jeff from inside that war room that those are the guys they're looking at and giving him some little Easter eggs. So clearly that was their plan. There's not really much else they could have done. They could have gone corner or something of the sort, but it felt like, they've kind of finished their offense off. I don't know that they were going to find a starting guard day 1 in round 3 there in their book. And from there, hey, go grab the best defensive players available on your board. And hopefully next year, when you have to make some decisions and you've got a high-paid quarterback now, some of those guys are able to step up and you can keep your defensive machine well-oiled.
Yeah, I think that the Simpson pick, it was BPA, and I think Eric DeCosta had that very valuable insight after the pick where he said, look, they had like 7 or 8 guys on their board at the start of round 3 or something of that nature. And then by the end they had 1 and it was him. And so they took him. So that the Ravens are a BPA team. We know that. And so it wasn't necessarily shocking when that came out, but you mentioned Kyu Blue Kelly, Spencer, you mentioned Tavius Robinson as well. How'd you like what they did on day 3, including the undrafted class? I know Dante Demas, Keaton Mitchell are a couple of guys people are really excited about there.
Yeah, I like what they did. They were able to really let their board play in front of them. They go get a super twitched up, long edge defender that I think in terms of, we talk about receiver, what Bucky Brooks and Daniel Jeremiah love to talk about, building out that starting 5. You need a point guard through a center, a bigger guy, smaller, twitchier guy. Well, when you look at Odafe Owe and David Ajabo and Tyus Bowser, potentially, hey, maybe Justin Houston comes back. But then, hey, you watch Calais Campbell go a little bit. I don't think he's quite built that way at all, but you do need someone that is a little longer, has a little more length, can hopefully, play a 4-eye for you at times. Maybe not against the run on day 1, but a really athletic, somewhat developmental power 5 player that was productive this past year. You can see what he can do in space and out of that twitchiness. The Ravens have developed edges really well over the years, making them into starting caliber players wherever they get them. So like the plan there. And then again, came on this podcast and said, I think you can get quality cornerbacks on day 3, late day 2, day 3 of this draft in that physical press man trope. And lo and behold, they go get someone who started throughout 4 years, really was a complete starter in 3 of those years and has a ton of production. Someone who maybe isn't the most flashy athlete in the world, but technically in terms of his ability to mirror off the line of scrimmage, press and transition, backpedal through his hips, shuffle and slide through his technique, pretty darn clean and brings a physical presence about him too. So I think Kyu Blue Kelly is a little bit different than a Jalen Armour Davis you had last year. Now you have 2 kind of different styles or body types of athlete in some ways. And you hope those guys can duke it out behind Brandon Stevens and potentially bringing in a veteran to make sure that you've got different types of bodies. But felt a little bit more like the classic Ravens corner than maybe what I had thought in Mike McDonald's system. Maybe look for more of a zone corner, someone that can kind of just vision to the ball. But Kelly's someone that you do want to keep things in front of, especially at first, and maybe keep a little underneath. But a press man corner in many ways that went up against some pretty big names out there in the Pac-12, and hopefully the Ravens are able to get him on the field in the next 2 years.
Yeah, and I know, you talk about the offensive line there too. The Voorhees trade was, I think, amazing for them. I think he was someone a lot of people were targeting, toward the ACL as well, and then goes out there and just rocks out 38 on the bench. Was the most among all prospects, so that was incredible. And then I'm excited about Dante Demas and Keaton Mitchell. I think those are two guys that have realistic shots to make this roster. They signed a bunch of other guys as well, Delaware quarterback as well. So what wasn't Stetson Bennett? He goes in the 4th to the Rams, which I know to some people is a little bit surprising. The Todd Monken reunion there is unfortunately no more, but I gave him a solid B+, A-. You kind of in that same range, Spencer?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. It's always tough to grade the taste of the chicken before it hatches there. So think that to their plan, it sounded like they were able to stick and really well evaluated the board and where they would be, and things kind of fell the exact way that they thought they would. So I think the Ravens, accomplished what they set out for. Didn't have a ton of picks, so it's not really, a high drama draft in any way. So they go for that strategy of sticking and picking throughout. They trade back in, go get Voorhees for super cheap. He might have gotten offered more money as a UDFA. Something interesting we saw this year, some really big UDFA contracts that are bigger than guarantees that 7th rounders had. So Voorhees, they can redshirt, bring him on in, take the pressure off of him, made sure that nobody else was able to go kind of out offer them. So I think they had a nice plan. They stuck to it, and they feel like they're back on track here. The Lamar Jackson deal, of course, kind of you lump into that. And for all intensive reports, they kind of got Jackson for what they budgeted for. It was a little bit above, but wasn't really a surprise. It was a year later, so they bumped it up after the market. You see Jalen Hurts get his deal. They beat that a little bit, but the figures, the guarantees in terms of injury and upfront, fully guaranteed, were just a little higher than kind of what they had last year. So cap goes up every year, and feels like they're back on track for what they expected, where exactly they expected themselves to be, finally headed into 2023. And I think you really just look at Zay Flowers in this class, and if that was their guy, they got him. So I'm sure they feel like they got an A+ in that sense. If that's who they were really looking for, it sounds like you could tell how fired up they were. They do always kind of tend to be that way, but that's why I think teams look at them as one of the better drafting teams over time. And hopefully, I mean, it's tough. Sub 5'10" receiver, sub 30-inch arms, coming out of, not a huge program. Maybe if he went to an Alabama, he gets drafted, 5-10 slots higher. But hopefully he's not a single or a double. Hopefully they hit that home run. I think they're due for a bust or a home run. So I think Zay Flowers, through maybe a little bit more of narrative, it's time for him to be a nothing or an absolute something. The Ravens have just hit so many singles in the first round the last few years. So I'll hold off on the grades, but we'll see. I think this year he's going to make an impact. And hey, if you don't really get a ton out of a 3rd, a 4th, and a 5th round pick, not the end of the world. Happens a lot. So thin class, tough to really, feel like it was something that was super drastic. It was more in the scope of Lamar Jackson signing and them hopefully getting their guy offensively.
Yeah, and I appreciate the baseball references with how absolutely on fire the Orioles are right now. And it's time for the Adley extension. We got the Lamar extension out of the way. Let's get the Adley extension on board now. But coming up, we'll be talking about the corner room. We'll be talking about the potential of adding Rocky Yassin and Marcus Peters. Maybe both of them. Talk a bit about Lamar as well. So be sure to stay tuned. A lot to dive into on Locked On Ravens. We're back rounding out Locked On Ravens here. Our final segment. Kevin Ostreicher still here with Spencer Schultz. And Spencer, I do. It's a bit of a clever way to do this because it feels like with what the Ravens have at corner, someone is coming in. It's sometime. It could be before the show comes out on Tuesday, could be during Tuesday, could be on Wednesday. So I want to ask you this in a way that, if they sign at some point, either on Monday night or on Tuesday, the answer is indicative of what they could bring to the team. So if the Ravens did sign Rocky Yassin, if you got the notification, the Ravens are signing Rocky Yassin to 1-year deal or 2-year deal, they're bringing him in, how would you feel?
I would feel like they're pretty much done. Maybe aside from a Justin Houston or, another couple kind of vet minimum guys that want to come in. There's a couple still floating out there that maybe want to go play some football. So ultimately, Yasin's been a starter, been someone that you can count on. I kind of look at him as a similar signing to what they did with Fuller last year. Yasin's a little younger than that, though, a little less tread on the tires. So would feel like, hey, they have experienced veterans pretty much everywhere. They don't really have any gigantic gaping holes. I don't know that their not front seven, let's call it their front five, is really going to blow you away on paper. But I think Anthony Weaver's done such a good job with guys like Justin Madubuike and Broderick Washington and making sure that they are extremely competent against the run. They're able to build the wall. They're able to single gap, two gap, penetrate, or kind of hold ground there, let those linebackers go run around. That it feeds into their system well. So, you're looking around this roster. If they sign Rock Ya-Sin, you're hoping that an Odafe Owe and a Tyus Bowser and a David Ojabo are going to give you immediate pass rushing presence. They're counting on Ojabo. They were willing to wait and willing to sacrifice a year of contribution from a top 50 pick to go get him. So, Odafe Owe, they're hoping, looks ready to make himself some money. He just bought a house in Baltimore recently. So bought a house right downtown, and hopefully they're getting squared up to make a real certified stud at him. Hopefully someone that can maybe kick inside a little more, play a little bit more of a power, strong side game. I think because he runs that 4-3, he gets a little mislabeled and misused at times even, asking him to be a speed player, a finesse player. But he's 6'5" and has a ton of functional strength. I don't know that asking someone 6'5", 6'6" to run the arc and try and go speed ghosts around tackles is the best usage all the time. I'd love to see him add functional strength. So that's really where I'm looking. Left guard, I think between John Simpson, Ben Cleveland, some other internal options, McCary, potentially another veteran added to the mix. I think that's really the only question mark offensively that they have at this point. And defensively, I mean, hey, bring back Justin Houston, who was able to be super productive, continue to wind back his snaps, let the other guys go figure it out on rundowns, and bring in Houston to go get some money on third down. And it's a good team. I do think ultimately, maybe on paper, Michael Pierce is going to come back. That allows Travis Jones to play on more 3-tech, be a little bit more versatile. I do think Broderick Washington's a nice piece. Madubuike, it's also time to make money, but I think they are maybe lacking one star player in that defensive line to take them over the top. Someone that is a true impact defender that can contribute on all 4 downs. And if they grow someone into that, maybe it is a Madubuike, maybe it is an Owe, heck, maybe an Ojabo, then they're going to be in a great place. But if not, I think the trade deadline is where we look. So if you add Yasin, I'm looking to the trade deadline basically and seeing where the Ravens can go, where Eric DeCosta can go make his classic trade deadline swoop in, like a Peters or a Smith or an Ngakoue, and try and go put a real finishing touch on a contender once they're winning some games, hopefully in September and October.
Yeah, and then that's Locked On Ravens legend, Justin Houston. I hope he's back. I think he is the legend of this show. I don't think there's anyone. Julio Jones is up there. Antonio Brown is there. Jordan Addison could have been there, but unfortunately it's just it was not meant to be. But I want to put a twist on that notification. Let's say, Spencer, you look down at your phone. It's not Rock Ya-Sin. It says the Ravens have re-signed Marcus Peters. Or the Ravens have signed both Rock Ya-Sin and Marcus Peters. Does that flip anything for you?
Both would be a really worthy move. I mean, ensure veteran competence or veteran presence that you're able to bring in someone that will be with your needs in terms of figuring out zone, passing off, rotating after the snap, those kinds of things. Brandon Stevens, the guy that's going to have every opportunity to beat out either of them, I feel like, at this point. But I think at this point, maybe leaning towards Ya-Sin at his age versus Marcus Peters. Love what Marcus Peters has done, but maybe this offseason helps Peters get back a little bit more to where he was before that injury. But wouldn't be shocked to see maybe Peters drift up to follow Wink Martindale, who fit so well in that system, a little bit more. But I don't know. I think Ya-Sin's the way to go ultimately, and wouldn't hate bringing back Peters just to make sure you got that veteran depth. And I don't think it would be very expensive or cost you anything else. So with that in mind, go get both. Sure.
Yeah, I think both would be great. And I think the Lamar extension or contract, whenever those details get released, it'll bring up the flexibility to be able to do something like that you probably couldn't have done on that $32.4 million franchise tag hit. But finally, Spencer, about Lamar's deal, again, the 52 average annual value, $185 million guaranteed there, plus the 260. It's I think a good deal for both Lamar and the Ravens. I mean, what were your initial thoughts when he signed it?
Yeah, again, I was just thinking that I didn't know if Lamar would ever come back to being realistic outside of the Deshaun Watson deal, but he most certainly was. And my first thought was this is basically exactly what they budgeted for. Just slightly, it's a few million more guaranteed in both aspects of injury guarantee and upfront. So I think he had about 71% guaranteed versus something in the 60s. So to me, it was just a nice time to get it done. It ensures that you're not going to go through some weird spot in training camp. I think he's happy to attend. I think he feels at home, and he's a Raven for life. That's kind of my first thought. Even if he does end up drifting around or extending his career elsewhere after this contract, like Joe Flacco or whatever, it's a Raven for life contract. He's going to spend his entire 20s in Baltimore for the most part. So the identity of the Ravens, the direction they're headed in with Todd Monken. You get the clarity of Zay Flowers that they are, all in on offense. They sniffed around Cortland Sutton, DeAndre Hopkins. They've been really thoroughly trying to make a move to solidify this offense and make sure that Lamar Jackson has what he needs to be successful with that contract. And it just, I think, quenched a lot of narratives overall in sports take, first take, hot take, Jason La Canfora take, that, the Ravens are cheap or the Ravens is that. Now, in hindsight, they've paid Marlon Humphrey, Ronnie Stanley, Mark Andrews wasn't top of market, but right towards it. I think Stanley was 1, Humphrey was 2 for corner, and Roquan Smith number 1. Suddenly you're dishing out tons of money for Lamar Jackson. So this whole notion that the Ravens are cheap or that it's not the place to get paid, I think goes out the window. And I think it just gives you clarity overall as a fan base, as a franchise, as a team, as players, as coaches, that you're doing it. You're trying to win a Super Bowl in the next 2-3 years here, especially before Jackson's more expensive cap hits take into effect. So it's time. It's go time. It's time for the Ravens to put the pedal to the floor. Its excuses are over, unless they go through some crazy injury spell again. It feels like, at this point, you look at Ojabo and Voorhees and what they did bringing on Dixon from the Titans staff. They're kind of taking the Titans route. Yeah, we're happy to draft players that are going to redshirt medically. We're confident in our staff's ability to rehabilitate them. They fire Steve Saunders to get right in that department. Maybe it was late, but they eventually do. So excuses are done. It's time to win. It's time to win the AFC North. It's time to stick it back to the Bengals and host a home playoff game and, go play in an AFC championship, go take the Chiefs or the Bills or whomever in a strong AFC to the brink and hopefully go hoist a Lombardi eventually. So it's go time. All hands on deck, flying forward.
Yeah, feels like the vibes are back. The Lamar thing, I think a big sigh of relief for everybody in that. Lamar, the Ravens, everybody covering it. And I think the Ravens, they have a chance to do something special this year. But we'll see. We'll see how the rest of the roster ends up shaping out. But Spencer, I appreciate you. That's all I have for you here today on the show. Please tell people with the draft over what you're working on and also where they can find your stuff.
Yeah, you can just go check out the Exit 52 podcast. We're churning out content, following the Orioles, following the Ravens, trying to get as many guests as we can to come break things down in the fallout, and looking forward to this season and doing some live meetups, some listener events, things of that nature. So check out the Exit 52 podcast anywhere you get your podcasts. Also, make sure to give Kevin 5 stars or share this podcast with a friend. If you're an Apple or a Spotify listener, go give Kevin some 5 stars. The man gives you the best daily Ravens coverage. So reward him and share the good word.
A major shout out to Spencer, as always, for hopping on Talking Ravens. Of course, all the links to his work in the description below. Be sure to check that out and be sure to subscribe here on Locked On Ravens on YouTube. We're a 5-day-a-week Ravens podcast, audio form, video form. Also, you can follow me on Twitter at ChaosRecord34. And I'm expanding a little bit to Instagram on ChaosRecord34, also Facebook as well. It's just my name. So be sure to check me out over there as well. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm going to get back here tomorrow. More Ravens content, so be sure to stay tuned for that. And I'll see you right back here tomorrow.